For a record 6 years now, Squarespace has been helping me turn my dream into reality, and that's what Squarespace does for millions of other people too. Their industry-leading website creation tools help millions of people start new careers, build new businesses, or just get things done. They're offering a special discount to viewers of this channel, so stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Alright, let's do the disclaimer thing since I know how this one's going to go. This is a review written by me, Shillup. It's an opinion, it is not a statement of objective fact. Every single critic review for this game is either mixed or positive, so please go and read and watch other reviews because clearly I'm not on the same page as everyone else with this one. Most importantly, if you like Metroid Prime games and you want to play another one of them that feels almost identical in all key aspects, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is the game for you, so long as you don't mind the inclusion of a bunch of bullshit that makes the game worse than the original games, or at least certainly worse than Metroid Prime 1, since I know 2 and 3 were a bit of a mixed bag. I make this point because I definitely reflect on the feedback I got from my Ghost of Yote review, where people were like, hey man, just because this isn't new doesn't mean it isn't good, and that's very true, and I think it's especially relevant here in Metroid Prime 4, because this is the first Metroid Prime game in over a decade, and I'm sure that plenty of people are going to be really happy with this because they just want that old school Metroid Prime feeling. And you know what? That old school feeling is really the one part of Metroid Prime 4 that I really loved. Like I said in my preview, it's been a really long time since we've played a Metroid Prime game, and even since games were designed like this controller-first model of shooters that found its feet in the Xbox and PS2 and GameCube era, the combat pacing, assisted enemies, time to kill, the size of the enemies, and the speed of projectiles. The way that Metroid Prime 4 tunes these things feels pulled from that bygone era, and there's a nice, familiar, nostalgic feeling that you get stepping back into it. There's also great comfort to be found in the core Metroid Prime formula, and by that I mean, it's cool to see the world through Samus's visor. It's cool to scan things and let the flavor text do the storytelling. It's cool to be a morph ball and roll through the gizzards of a world like a sunken cue ball rolling back towards the dispensary. In moments like these, Metroid Prime 4 is still a Metroid Prime game, but it is absolutely no more than that. And after waiting this long for it, and after seeing how much the Metroidvania genre has evolved in the past 2 decades, and after seeing how much Nintendo has evolved their flagship franchises, I think it would have been fair to have expected a lot more from Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I don't think that unlocking the double jump power-up is enough to cut it in 2025 when you don't use that power-up for anything more interesting than you can now reach that place that you couldn't reach before. Modern Metroidvania design takes those power-ups and makes them more than just keys. They become mechanical augments, offering you new capabilities that can be used creatively in different contexts to deepen moment-to-moment gameplay or facilitate more engaging level or puzzle design. But here in Metroid Prime 4, almost all the power-ups you collect have no functionality beyond their lock and key utility. If Prime 4 wasn't going to expand the formula, then perhaps it could have refined it, but it didn't do that either. Backtracking, for example, is something we look back on with affection because it was a simpler time back then. But in 2025, backtracking is something we have solved by either avoiding it or by making it worthwhile or interesting. Metroid Prime 4 not only has boring backtracking when nothing happens, but it's made worse by adding in unskippable loading sequences and these weird lengthy stretches of nothingness between the desert's exit point and the actual place you're trying to get to. The collectibles economy and incentives are similarly unresolved. When I already have 200 rounds for my elemental weapons, do I really want to schlep across the entire map so I can solve a puzzle that gives me another 10 rounds? Instead of innovating on or refining the core Metroid Prime formula, Retro has instead opted to just bolt a bunch of bullshit onto it, and all of it makes the game worse. The team of companions you meet are an ill fit for the tone of the game, and they chime in with unhelpful advice and commentary all the time, and the fact that Samus just stares at them totally mute for the game's entire runtime is so weird. The bike is such a disappointment given how underutilized it is, except when traversing the desert, and the desert is unspeakably awful. It is just a barren wasteland of boredom and disappointment, and its biggest offering are green crystals that you have to smash into, and you better smash into those green crystals. Otherwise, you will find yourself in the position that I found myself in, where I was forced to spend an entire hour doing laps around this desert, smashing into green crystals before I could commence this game's finale. That is a true story, by the way. I swear to God, I'll come back to that later. Look, it's obvious that I have strong feelings about this game. I'm a Nintendo fan. I'm a Metroid fan. I'm a Metroidvania fan. I absolutely love the ever-living shit out of Metroid Dread. I thought it was incredible. But this was honestly just a massive disappointment, and I think that if the Prime franchise is to continue, it's going to need to be rebuilt from first principles, because right now it just feels haphazard, confused, and dated. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is the latest game in the hit video game series Metroid, starring the titular hero, John Metroid. No, I'm joking, of course. Samus Aran is back, and this time she's lost her powers and needs to get them back. What? It all starts on a space station besieged by space pirates. Samus repels the attack only for Sylex to rock up, triggering an ancient artifact that whisks Samus away to a different planet, bereft of her ship and her powers. She now needs to find a way off that rock so she can continue her bounty hunting adventures. Story-wise, we've got to start with one of Metroid Prime 4's biggest whiffs, Sylex. This guy is introduced in the first major cutscene, and you get the sense that he's going to be the game's antagonist, but he's not. The game has no real antagonist, to be honest. Sylex just rocks up a few times and you can fight him. Doesn't have any real dialogue. He doesn't explain his motives or whatever. I honestly don't know what his deal is, other than he hates Samus. There's probably some codex entry that tells me something about him, but it's notable that the cast of companions won't shut up and will endlessly spout exposition, but it feels like the game has too few words to spare to set up a compelling villain. So you can basically just park him as a narrative element, to be honest. The broader story that unfolds is okay. It's centered on an extinct race of beings who once occupied this planet. The last of their kind has been waiting for Samus since she's been prophesized as a chosen one, and the narrative is then centered on trying to figure out how this race fell into extinction. Each of the major dungeons you'll visit tells part of that story, and there isn't a huge amount of expository dialogue or whatever, but through a combination of environmental storytelling, scanned data, codices, and the odd cutscene here or there, you can piece together a story worth paying attention to, one all the richer for the gaps that it leaves. The process of piecing this together is far more engaging and rewarding than having it spoon-fed to you. And that's very much in keeping with the Prime franchise, so it's nice to see that Retro have shown some restraint here. I wish they showed the same restraint when it came to the other main narrative element, companions. Now, obviously, everyone really went to town on Paul Miles during the preview cycle, declaring Metroid murdered at his hands. The truth is, he's not that bad on his own when put together with a cast that are equally goofy in their own way. The whole narrative tone of the game is thrown off balance. So the way this works is that each dungeon, of which there are 5, will introduce you to a new companion character. They'll typically fight alongside you for a bit before heading back to base camp when the dungeon is clear. After that, they'll chime in on radio every now and then, or they'll appear in cutscenes when it's relevant. These characters, by and large, are not aligned to the overall tone of the Metroid franchise. You've probably seen Miles' introduction already. Here's another one for Private Armstrong. Show him, Stu.
Samus, it's really you. I don't even know what to say. Is this a new suit? It's amazing. I love it. I love it so much. Yes, sir. Right, sorry. Private First Class Nora Armstrong.
So yeah, now you can see it's not just Miles fangirling out. There's also a commander dude who's like Sergeant Johnson from Halo, but without anywhere near as much sauce, though to be fair, few humans, alive or dead, have as much sauce as Johnson had. There's a robot companion who, well, he's kind of just a robot really. There's one character who's a sniper, and he's actually pretty good, and he feels like he fits the game because he isn't trying to get Samus's autograph or some shit. Like, he's a proper warrior, and he's seen shit, and if the cast of characters was more like this, I could have seen it working, but seeing Samus babysit these fangirling dweebs just doesn't sit right.
Corporal Rieger Tokabi, Fed Sniper, Herc Unit Delta. It's good to finally cross paths with you, but tell me, where are we?
The crew is meant to be an emotional linchpin for the game, one that's leaned on pretty heavily and pretty often, but it doesn't work because Samus doesn't talk, and I don't want to get into a massive debate about the narrative effectiveness of the silent protagonist, so all I'll say is that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Here, it doesn't work. There are too many lines of lighthearted dialogue for Samus's brooding silence to come off as anything other than weird, and if the goal was to get me believing that there's some camaraderie between these people, then Samus needed to at least offer the odd please or thank you in pivotal moments, or something, anything more than just a barely perceptible nod of the head every 2 hours.
Glad you made it out. Thank you. Anyway, we could use a breather.
So these characters don't really fit with the sort of vibe that you want to experience in a Metroid game, but their most disruptive quality is what a nuisance they are in gameplay scenarios or in open world sequences. When fighting alongside them, they mostly just die and you have to spend valuable time resurrecting them, otherwise you get pushed to the game over screen. When you're exploring the desert and you're unsure where to go next, Miles will chime in by saying something vague like, maybe you should go back to somewhere you've been before and try out that new upgrade, which is not helpful because it's not specific. Or he'll say, you should go to this specific place to use that new upgrade, which I don't want him to do because I want to figure it out for myself. There's no option to turn him off, and oh my god, by the end of the game, when I'm forced to drive around the desert for an hour collecting green crystals, Miles calls me up every 10 minutes being like, hey man, don't forget green crystals, collect them, and then bring them back to base camp so you can grow the memory fruit, okay? And I'm just like, dude, shut up. Just shut up. What do you think I've been doing for the past hour, my dude? Please launch yourself into the sun. So, while the overall mystery of this planet is compelling and well told owing to its subtlety, the rest of the narrative falls very flat indeed. Silex is just a recurring mini-boss. I wouldn't even call him a villain, honestly. I think that assigns too much intent to him. The broader cast is a playful collection of tropey stereotypes who are an ill fit for this franchise, and Samus's inability to meet them at their conversation level makes it feel like either they or Samus wandered into the wrong game. But given that Samus's picture is on the box, it's probably them. Cap it off with some frustratingly pointless or overly prescriptive radio chatter, and you've got a narrative and cast that undermine the overall experience rather than enhance it. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Metroidvania design here and how much it's evolved over the past 2 decades, and the fact that Metroid Prime 4 reflects none of that evolution. I know some people are going to be like, you're just reviewing the game that you wanted it to be rather than the game that it is, because I get that feedback all the time. So let's just tick the box of reviewing the game for what it is. Metroid Prime 4 sees you visit 5 main dungeons to collect many of the same upgrades that you could get in previous games. Double jump, grapple, stronger missiles, elemental weapons, a morph ball that can stick to stuff, etc. You get them in the exact same way by exploring levels and defeating bosses. The level design is similar to the previous games, very linear, gated off by the necessary upgrades. Combat is identical to the previous games. All of this stuff works, and no parts of the core formula have evolved since the original trilogy back in the GameCube era. So similar to what I said in the intro, if you enjoyed that formula and you're looking to experience it again, only with some annoying bullshit bolted onto it, then Metroid Prime 4 will make you happy. And I want to be super clear about that. So with all that out the way, I'd like to talk about how little this formula has evolved here in Metroid Prime 4 and its unwillingness to solve entrenched issues baked into that formula, and how I don't think that any of this is to the game's benefit. Because let's not forget, there can be benefit to sticking with what is old. Think of the entire boomer shooter genre. Think of vanilla WoW. Sometimes all the stuff that gets piled on top of an idea is unnecessary, or it dilutes the core premise, and experiences that recenter that original premise, warts and all, can really work. But I don't think that the Metroidvania genre has become cluttered over the years. Rather, I think it's been refined and improved, and I think that Metroid Prime 4 would have been a vastly better game had it reflected some of those refinements and improvements. Metroidvania as a concept has a few different buckets: exploration through interconnected worlds, power-ups that let you push through those connections, and combat. It's probably good to look at Metroid Prime 4 using those same buckets. Exploration. It's a key word when we think Metroidvanias. We picture a large map that's all gated off by necessary power-ups, and within each zone there are plenty of secrets to find, be they optional boss encounters or story nuggets or currencies or even ancillary upgrades. I don't think that exploration is a particularly helpful word when we're talking about Metroid Prime 4. Generously, you could say that you are exploring this world because you are moving through space, but when we think Metroidvania exploration in 2025, we imagine that you're going to be able to choose where you go in a given moment, that we might choose one pathway that leads us to one destination, and then we need to remember to go back to that other pathway at some point because it too has something waiting for us. Metroid Prime 4 doesn't do that, despite it being a world connected via a vast desert hub. Each of the 5 dungeons must be done in a very specific order. The dungeons themselves are strictly linear. There is no choice involved in how you move through them. The collectible upgrades like more health or missile reserves that are available throughout the levels aren't really hidden. They're usually just there, and it's a simple question of whether or not you have the requisite power upgrade to be able to obtain them. Even things like the puzzle solving are kept to a real minimum here. There is some of it, absolutely, but I would say like 85% of the time, the puzzle is basically just, do you have the upgrade? I'll put it this way, there was 0 moments in this game where I was like, oh, whoa, didn't expect to stumble on this. 0 moments of surprise where I even had the chance to be curious, because everything was so linear and so leveraged into the need to have the right power up. And so at this point, you might be thinking, bro, that's Metroid Prime. That's how it's always been. And I'm like, yeah, that's my point. I've already done this. I did it 2 decades ago. Then I think of Hollow Knight and Animal Well and Guacamelee and Ori and Prey and so many other games, and I think it would have been cool for Metroid Prime 4's exploration model to have evolved somewhat, because plenty of other games in the past 2 decades have provided a template in both 2D and 3D. It's not even about the innovation imperative, it's the simple fact that I would have loved to have experienced a Metroid Prime world that I could freely explore and that would reward my curiosity. I think the game could have survived this had its Metroidvania upgrade system been refreshed, but I actually think this is the game's biggest core weakness weakness. Like the desert really sucks, but it's kind of ancillary. The bigger issue is the game's approach to power-ups. So first of all, you get a double jump and a grapple and a stronger morph bomb and stronger rockets, etc. From a basic design perspective, like we've waited 2 decades for this. Maybe we start with the double jump and then you give us an upgrade that actually makes it cool or interesting in some way. And that last part really matters, I think. Modern Metroidvania design gives you upgrades that have multiple layers of utility so that the double jump you get can also be used to unlock a new combat maneuver, or there's some mechanical flourish to the way that double jump works so that it becomes a skill check that facilitates new exploration or traversal challenges. But the double jump in Metroid Prime 4 has no utility in combat other than letting you dodge some boss attacks. There's no mechanical depth to it that might be tested in a platforming challenge. In fact, I can recall one platforming sequence in this entire game. So why did I get a double jump? Well, I got it because there are ledges in certain places that are too high to reach with one jump, so I needed a second. And that's it, that's all it is. Same could be said for basically every other upgrade. I got a lasso thing that I can use to pull things off doors or whatever, and I can use it against one enemy type who appears in one specific location very rarely, and then I can use it during one boss battle, and that's it. I think the biggest advancement that the Metroidvania genre has made in the past 2 decades is that upgrades have utility beyond their function as just keys. They enrich moment-to-moment gameplay, they deepen the combat sandbox, they facilitate more challenging and engaging level design. Metroid Prime 4's upgrades do not do this except in the most limited, almost tokenistic capacity. Combat is the last major bucket, and I'll say what I said in the preview, which is that combat in a Metroid Prime game feels good, because it's good to have that old school flair which holds up all these years later, especially because they don't make shooters that feel like this anymore. So I did enjoy fighting stuff as Samus, absolutely, but that enjoyment was similar to those other buckets where I'm like, this is fine, but like surely we can do better than this all these years later, right? Much of it comes down to a severe lack of enemy variety. There are only 2 main enemies in this entire game, I think. There are the Griever enemies, which just kind of leap at you or spit acid. There's robots, and there is some variance to them, but they all feel very similar despite these variances. There are some smaller bugs and drones you fight, but they aren't really much of a challenge. Overall, it's extremely limited, and if you had unique enemies in each major dungeon who had to be taken down using the new upgrades you just acquired, that could have gone a long way to enriching the combat sandbox. But as it is, it feels like you're fighting the same 2 enemies over and over again in the exact same way every single time for the game's full duration. So in summary, I think that the exploration is really limited, and I wouldn't even really call it exploration, to be honest. I think that the Metroidvania upgrades are old and boring, and they function more as keys than as things that might enrich the overall gameplay experience. And I think the combat feels good, but it's really one note, owing to those Metroidvania unlocks having no real bearing on the combat sandbox and owing to a lack of enemy variety. Separate to all of that stuff, I think Metroid Prime 4 had a chance to tidy up some of the relics of the Prime franchise's approach to things, and it didn't do that. In fact, sometimes it made things worse. Scanning is a good example. So to get 100% completion in this game, you need to scan everything, and even if that isn't your goal, you still need to scan stuff in order to progress, because that's how you figure out what to do. But so much is scannable that doesn't need to be scannable. Like, if it's a door that works like every other door, why is it necessary for me to scan it again? If it's a control panel that doesn't do anything, why do I need to scan it? The answer is that Retro uses these scans as a way to tell the story, and honestly, I agree with that goal, and I think it's a cool approach, but so often I'm like, come on man, that didn't really need to be a scannable thing. That flavor text was not worth it. I'm not saying get rid of scanning, because I like scanning, but you could have dialed back the amount of scannable objects by like 50%, and the game would have been better for it. Backtracking is another issue here. To be clear, there isn't a huge amount of it, but it's made worse by the structure of this game and how painfully slow it is to get to your actual destination. So the way this game is bolted together is super weird. There's a big desert in the middle and it connects the 5 major dungeons, but it's the connection to those dungeons that's the weird part, since there's an approach where you can only drive your bike slowly, and then there's some sort of lift or launcher or tram or something or other that triggers a loading sequence, and then there's this sort of like antechamber area where you have to approach the dungeon, and these spaces can be really long and full of nothing, particularly the one in the ice dungeon. And then after you've done all that, you're finally at your destination. It's just minutes of dead time with nothing going on after minutes spent driving through the empty desert with nothing to see or do. You're forced to go back to Miles every time you finish a dungeon, and it's so pointless. All he does is spout some technobabble, while he enables some upgrade you found, and the whole time you just think to yourself, dude, this could have been an email. And like I said, the backtracking through dungeons is pretty minimal, but it's also just not interesting. Like, good backtracking in a Metroidvania game will see you looking at those old spaces with new eyes, since you now have new capabilities that allow you to do new things that you couldn't do before. But here it's just like, well, that door required the electro beam upgrade, and you now have the electro beam upgrade, so you can progress through that door to collect your 10 extra missile reserves. And that's another thing, the consumable upgrades in Metroid Prime 4 are terrible. Like, you have these elemental weapons that you don't use all that much, and yet most of the upgrades give you more ammo reserves. By the end, I had 200 elemental rounds, and I'm like, I don't need that many, so why would I go across the map to go through all of these boring loading sequences to get 10 more rounds? Like, what's the actual incentive here? And the timing of these upgrades also sucks. I remember at one point I found a little shrine thing in the desert and it was locked behind the electro beam upgrade. And that's the last beam upgrade you get, by the way, so it's close-ish to the end of the game. So even if I had discovered this shrine earlier, I couldn't have opened it. So I do this shrine and it awards me an upgrade to my frost beam cannon that lets me charge it for a more powerful effect. And my first thought was, dude, I'm about to finish this game. Why would you give this to me now? I can't use it. At the very end of the game, when I was forced to collect green crystals, more on that in a second, I handed them in only to be awarded with my first upgrade for my beam cannon, like my main weapon. And I was like, okay, I really would have liked that 12 hours ago. That would have been a useful upgrade. But now it's just frustrating to know that I went an entire playthrough shooting stuff for longer than I had to, while the solution to that problem was hiding behind the single most boring and loathsome task in this entire game, namely driving around this god-awful desert smashing into green crystals. So things like scanning, backtracking, the value of upgrades, the timing of upgrades, all of these things needed major rework because they just feel so first pass. Like Retro put this stuff in and they didn't have time to properly test and refine it. It just feels so messy, and coupled with the lack of innovation in the core loop, you can absolutely see the scars on this thing inflicted by that troubled development cycle. But no more is that evident than with things like the bike and the desert and the game's thoroughly disappointing conclusion. The bike. Where to begin with this? So the bike, Viola, is something you get during your second dungeon. That dungeon actually includes a racetrack that teaches you how to use Viola. It's things like a slide boost attack that you never really use, and the ability to fling a projectile. Viola is used throughout the game in different ways, crossing the desert mainly, but also 2 boss encounters. There's nothing inherently wrong with Viola, to be honest with you. It's the fact that it's so inherently tied to being in the desert that's the problem. Viola becomes guilty by association more than anything else. This desert is like top 5 most hated places I've ever been in a video game, for real. I honestly can't believe that it made it into a first-party flagship Nintendo game in 2025. I truly can't. I've seen it compared to Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field, and to that I say, get Hyrule Field's name out your goddamn mouth. That was and is still a beautiful space. It had cleverly hidden secrets, it had a variety of enemies, it had NPCs journeying through it, it had a day-night cycle. In contrast, the desert in Metroid Prime 4 is ugly as sin. Its secrets, if you can even call them that, are just shrines and wreckages that you can just drive up to. It has 2 enemy types, both of which are nothing more than an annoyance. It has 0 NPCs moving through it. It has no night cycle, so it always looks the same. It's just incredible that something as drab and lifeless and boring and empty and sterile as this made its way into this game. It has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. But you know what it does have? Green crystals. And I guess this is where I should tell the full story. By the way, no spoilers, don't worry, and you honestly want to hear this if you are going to play this game, because you don't want to go through what I went through. So, after you complete the 5 dungeons, the game says, okay, time to get off this rock. And to do that, you need to access a tower at the center of the map, which is protected by a force field. The thing you need to deactivate the force field has to be built, and most of the components you need to do that are strewn about the desert. So because I never explored the desert because I hated being in it, I had to do that exploration at the end of the game so I could find these components. And that involved just driving around this desert for like 45 minutes or more. So I did that to get all the components. And while I'm doing that, Miles chimes in every now and then being like, hey, don't forget your green crystals. And I'm sort of ignoring him because the green crystals are just things that you smash into as you're driving around, and the game never really told me what I would get for collecting these crystals. and I saw this progress bar in the menu that was so incomplete when I was just about to finish the game that I thought to myself, there's no way the game actually wants me to collect these things. Surely that's just like a completionist thing, right? No, it is not. After you have built what needs to be built to bring down the force field, the Sergeant Johnson dude, he's like, okay, now we just need the memory fruit and we're good to go. And I'm like, well, hold up. First of all, how do you even know what that thing is? Since that's something that only the alien dude that I speak to really cares about. And second, why do you care if we have it or not if your goal is just to get your squad off this planet? But more importantly, are you really about to make me go out and smash into green crystals in the desert until this progress bar is full? Are you really gonna make me do that? The answer was yes. And then I spent more than an hour driving laps around this desert, smashing into crystals, because that is what Retro thought would be a good use of my time. After I had completed 5 dungeons and after I had assembled this force field machine thing, they really believed that it was important for me to drive around one of the worst open world hub areas I've ever experienced for more than an hour, smashing into green crystals. And then when you do that and you do access this tower, there's nothing in it. It's just a bunch of elevators and then the boss encounter, and it's like, that's it. And then, oh my God. Okay, so the final boss, again, no spoilers, I beat him, and then the game asked me to press a prompt in a pivotal cutscene style moment, and I don't want to press it because it looks like it's a choice, and I figured that if I don't press that button, something cool is going to happen. But what actually happens is that it's mission failed, and I get pushed to the game over screen, and then I have to fight the final boss again. There was no checkpoint after I beat him, so I have to do it again because I was stupid enough to think that this cutscene moment might have given me some agency, when really it was just completely pointless. So to you, dear viewer, I impart the following advice. You better smash those green crystals throughout your playthrough, and you better press that goddamn button when the time comes. Did my frustrations with these final hours spoil the overall Metroid Prime 4 experience? Undoubtedly, yes, to a degree. After wrapping those 5 dungeons, I was like, well, I didn't love this, but it's still a Metroid Prime game, and while it isn't doing anything new, it's holding close enough to a tried and true formula. I probably would have just titled this video Review instead of Do Not Recommend. Those final hours, man, they forced me to spend prolonged amounts of time in one of the worst open world hubs I've ever experienced, and they forced me to explore it thoroughly against my will, and then it thrust me back out there to do one of the most mind-numbingly inane tasks I can recall any video game asking me to do in the last, I don't know, like decade. Like, how did this make it into the game? How did Nintendo look at this and think, yep, that hits our quality bar, ship it? And then to unlock this disappointing final location, which stood tall in the middle of the map the entire game, and you always imagine that it'd be really cool to get in there and whatever, but nothing happens in there, man. It's just elevators and then the boss and this cutscene prompt thing. So yeah, this stuff definitely pushed me over the edge, for sure. But not because those hours themselves were so bad, though they were, but because they prompted like a deeper reflection on the whole package. Psylocke remains MIA almost the entire playthrough, so this game has no villain. Companions are awkward, and hearing Miles yap at you over comms reminding you to do something you were already doing is annoying. After I had fully explored the desert and collected all the force field machine components from the wreckages strewn about, I met the hunter dude at a campfire, and while we're chatting he says to me, hey, did you know there are wreckages strewn about the desert? And I'm like, am I being punked right now? Like, I just spoke to you at the team's base camp about the fact that I collected all the pieces from the wreckages. Like, what is going on? Then there's the weird way the desert is connected to the dungeons with these lengthy stretches of hallways and loading screens, and chancing upon some new collectible kept giving me resources that I didn't need or that I no longer had the chance to use because the game was basically over. This game famously switched development teams 8 years ago, and now in the lead up to its release, the first new Metroid Prime game in 18 years got a brief trailer in the middle of a Nintendo Direct, whereas Sakurai hosted 2 directs for Kirby's Air Riders, both of them nearly an hour long, and that is a game that you play with one button. I think there was a reason Nintendo didn't throw their weight behind this one. I think there was a reason the previews didn't show off any of the Viola or Desert gameplay. I think Nintendo knew what sort of game they had on their hands here as they approached the launch, and I think that after so much money spent developing it, they just wanted to get it out despite the very obvious flaws and shortcomings it suffers from. I wish I could say that it's good enough, but frankly, I don't think that it is. I don't think it hits the sort of quality bar that we've come to expect from Nintendo, and I don't think you should go out of your way to play this one. Do you run your own business or do you want to? If so, a website is really helpful and there's no better or easier way to build a website than Squarespace. Let's say, for example, you have a store that sells stuff, I don't know, clothes, shoes, furniture, cell phones, whatever. That store exists in just one spot and you're probably only able to service your local area, but what if you could tap into a much bigger market? What if you had a website that lets customers find you no matter where they are? What if they could see your inventory online and make purchases? And what if you had a website that could facilitate all of that seamlessly? Well, that's exactly what Squarespace does. Squarespace lets you build professional-looking websites in minutes. You just select from their extensive list of pre-built templates, customize those templates to your heart's desire, and boom, an incredible-looking website that looks like it costs thousands of dollars to build, when in reality, you did it all yourself. That's just the front end, whereas business owners are going to be equally interested in the back end. Squarespace provides intuitive tools for inventory management, customized shipping options and label printing, simple payment solutions through platforms like PayPal and Stripe, and detailed analytics so you can track how well business is going. There's even award-winning customer support on hand to assist you should you ever get stuck or just need some advice. It's an easy-to-use end-to-end solution that could change your life, to be honest. A website is one of the best ways to get yourself or your business out there, so if you're thinking about kicking off something new, either personally or professionally, a website is certainly going to be a great step in that process. If you want to get started, then visit squarespace.com to start building your website through their free trial, and if you want to get serious, then use offer code SKILLUP at checkout for a 10% discount off your purchase of a website or a domain name. Thanks very much to Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.